This climactic showdown featured a set piece that made even the director nervous. Not because it was terrifying, but because it had the potential to be so silly, it would take audiences out of the film. Instead, it became one of the comedy classic's most iconic images. Today, we take an in-depth look at perhaps the gooeyest finale in movie history.
What is it? It can't be!
We're talking the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. In 1981, Dan Aykroyd, hot off his success from Saturday Night Live and the Blues Brothers, read an article on quantum physics and parapsychology. You know, as one does if you come from a family who's held seances in their Ontario farmhouse for generations. Aykroyd's first choice for director was Ivan Reitman, whose work on Animal House, Stripes, and Meatballs had made him a much sought-after filmmaker. Reitman looked at Aykroyd's special effects-laden first draft and declared it impossible to make. But he saw brilliance in its ideas, many of which, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man included, would make it into the final cut.
Well, there's something you don't see every day.
In Aykroyd's current script, Mr. Stay Puft showed up on page 20 and was but only one of Gozer's forms and only one of dozens of giant monsters. Reitman believed if the majority of the film was grounded, the supernatural elements could build, and by the end, the audience might actually buy into the idea of a climactic King Kong-esque attack by a marshmallow sailor. But that didn't stop him from being nervous about it, and throughout the writing process and the early stages of production, they kept trying to come up with an alternative.
If we think of J. Edgar Hoover will appear and destroy us, okay? So empty your head!
Reitman pitched the idea to Columbia Pictures without the script, and Columbia gave them a budget of $25 million, an unusually high price tag for a comedy in those days.
For your information, the interest rate alone for the first 5 years comes to $95,000.
But there was a catch. Columbia had a hole in their schedule the following summer, and they needed a movie to fill it. They had a year. It was already crunch time, but the script wasn't in any shape to shoot. Reitman and Aykroyd sequestered themselves away with a pile of cocaine and typewriters and got to work. Associate producer Michael Gross immediately began searching for a visual effects facility to capture the variety of special effects needed for the film, which was still being written. Most of the major facilities were already booked with small indie films you've probably never heard of, like Return of the Jedi and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But then Gross learned that three-time Academy Award winner Richard Edlund was looking to leave George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic to set up shop for himself. With Ghostbusters and MGM's 2010 on their slate, Edlund's visual effects company Boss Film Studios opened its doors and immediately got to work. Tom Enrique began to conceptually design the Marshmallow Man in these photos from the Laserdisc. You can see how it really bounced back and forth between the Michelin Man and the Pillsbury Doughboy, and even at times skews over into Bob's Big Boy. But how outrageous was too outrageous? Even after seeing the test footage, Reitman was afraid that Mr. Stay Puft was too silly to be the centerpiece of the film's climax. And he wasn't the only one. Harold Ramis, editor Sheldon Kahn, and even Aykroyd's own father all had major doubts. Harold Ramis kept trying to justify the Marshmallow Man, finally resting on the idea that it seemed to me very appropriate that when our monster finally appeared, it turned out to be a marshmallow. That, literally and figuratively, our biggest fear of the unknown was as insubstantial as a marshmallow. So saith Harold Ramis. Ultimately, everyone else was won over by Aykroyd's insistence that a benign, silly bit of faux American consumerism was the most unexpected choice for Gozer the Destructor's vital embodiment.
I couldn't help it. It just popped in there.
In the original script, a 300-foot Mr. Stay Puft emerged from the Hudson River next to the Statue of Liberty. Everyone agreed that was going to be expensive monies. So they cut the river shot and decided to make Mr. Stay Puft smaller. Finally, Reitman set the height at 112.5 feet, exactly halfway between the production staff pushing for 100 feet and those who wanted it to be an extra 25. This decision by Reitman of 112.5 feet required them to build a 1/18th scale set, which was uncommon at the time. According to model shop supervisor Mark Stern, this created a unique problem.
You don't find any accurate model kits in that scale, so I scoured Toys R Us and found this police car that looked like a New York police car, was the right vintage and the right size, as it turned out. So I called all the Toys R Us stores in Southern California and bought all they had. We chopped them up and turned them into fire trucks and taxis and police cars and everything else.
For the Marshmallow Man himself, multiple Stay Puft suits were constructed from pliable foam, and 3 different heads were sculpted by Linda Frobos to achieve the range of facial expressions the monster would need. Each featured fiberglass skulls and a cable system to control different facial movements. And Mr. Stay Puft's trek through miniature Central Park West required the work of 4 puppeteers operating his face with cables through slits in the elevated set. But you don't build a giant marshmallow man so he can take a stroll through the park. So when it came time for him to climb a building while engulfed in flames, mechanical effects supervisor Thane Morris called upon pyrotechnician Joe Viscasil to construct a fire-retardant version of the costume to be worn by a stuntman. For his melting head, a plastic cord was placed next to a model of the top of the apartment building, with 3 propane heaters pointed at the head and filmed over the course of 20 minutes at a frame every second. The moment that the Ghostbusters crossed their stream to vanquish Gozer and save the world called for an explosion. The designers, who came from an animation background, created a cool but bizarrely shaped explosion and turned to Morris to build it. Morris, whose works with pyrotechnics can also be seen in Wrath of Khan and Return of the Jedi, said no problem. And then everyone immediately argued about how big the explosion should be. Reitman pointed out in an explosion that large, all the Ghostbusters would be killed, which the effects team pointed out.
Well, yeah, that's the joke. That's the whole point. That's the joke.
Cut from the finished movie is a smaller scene with Mr. Stay Puft's hat slowly floating to the ground. This was done with an 18-foot aluminum reinforced hat, which was slowly lowered from above by a crane. Unfortunately, it was cut not because it didn't look great, but because of pacing issues. For the aftermath of the blast, which deliciously roasts Mr. Stay Puft, the production team mixed up batches of shaving cream 500 gallons at a time. According to William Atherton, for bureaucrat Walter Peck's comeuppance, the production team wanted to dump 150 pounds of shaving cream on him from above, which he felt was kind of a lot. The production team called him a pussy. So Atherton had them dump it on a stuntman first. When it absolutely flattened the stuntman, knocking him to the ground, everyone agreed that they probably only needed half as much. The ultimate test of how well this sequence came together would be in how audiences reacted to the first glimpse of Mr. Stay Puft's head bobbing among the skyscrapers in New York's iconic skyline. Even without most of the finalized effects, the final test audience went nuts, topping their already positive reaction to the rest of the film.
Thank you. They love you. They love you here.
Ghostbusters opened in June 1984. Well, 2 months into its theatrical run, it was among the top 10 all-time box office performers and went on to gross over $225 million. While the sequel is considered by some as disappointing,
This movie is a total disappointment. No thought went into it, no effort went into it, there's no comedy in it.
it couldn't stop this chubby fella from achieving an iconic status.
We came, we saw, we kicked its ass.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out Art of the Scene. Ghostbusters is one of my favorite movies, so this was a real treat to work on. Let us know in the comments below an iconic scene that you think we should take a look at. We'd love to hear from you. Also, check out all of our great content here on Cinefix. We'll see you in a bit.